Tamur, welcome. It's great to have you here. Things are crazy out there. Lufthansa Group, makes up a huge part of the European airline landscape. And you've said in the past that the pandemic exposed deficiencies, particularly in customer experience. And yet, here we are. Why didn't airlines use that time to make things more efficient? They knew this tsunami was coming.
Yeah, thank you, first of all, having me. I think one learning that we all had is that ramping down has been hard, ramping up has been even harder.
Yeah.
And we all experience it now, coming in and out of this airport here in Schiphol. And I came yesterday evening, and I was 2 hours late, and there was no finger. And we sat then for another hour in the plane, actually, and so on. So I think we all have experienced this in the last days, and clearly this industry is on the edge. We can see that things in this complex endeavor are not fitting together in the way that everybody had wanted it, and the excess demand, where we clearly see, is putting certain roadblocks on the way of recovery. Demand is there, but now it's really the question, can we get our act together with all the stakeholders? And I think this summer will be very critical, very difficult. If you ask why, I think some people have underestimated the demand, but also you cannot control all the elements of that value chain, and this is something very, very visible now in the physical journey of the customer. But of course, that's also a challenge on all our digital endeavors, and maybe there are some similarities to what we experienced in the last 10 years, and the catch-up there, which is very much a part of this conference here, is very important, and something that we can learn from, maybe is from what we experience currently now with all the stakeholders. What actually is then the consequence for what we do together here on the digital side, because we will have similar challenges, overcoming the hurdles to the next frontiers of digital innovation, of air retailing, and all these things that are on our roadmaps.
Well, we'll come back to digital retailing in a minute, but do you, there is a sense out there that there's been a lost opportunity in all of that downtime, and customers really are kind of left floundering. Where are the things do you think generally that should have been done? Should have we been communicating with customers more ahead of time? I've seen letters that have come out from Lufthansa in recent days. Was there a way to perhaps educate the customer? Was there things that could have been done?
Well, I think there has been a lot of learnings in the crisis, and we learned it the hard way, I think, and I think there has been already great things done, and sometimes we say, yes, of course we can blame ourselves, but to blame ourselves, this is our first pandemic, so to say. Yeah. Definitely there are things that you cannot learn in a textbook, and where you know maybe better afterwards, but other things you simply don't control. Let's take air traffic control, and you have maybe seen the news that in Switzerland the whole country stood still for a couple of hours, and it showed how sensitive and vulnerable a country is without aviation. And so there are things that you cannot control,
Sure.
I think, under these circumstances. The ones you can control, of course, you have to anticipate, and of course there are plans, and I would even say that the plans that we had are very much still intact in terms of what we planned, but then if not all the stakeholders play along, and you see the problems on the ground, in the air, in air traffic control, et cetera, then there's something you need to discuss with those players and see how can we find a joint plan going forward. So it's not so easily controllable with hindsight.
So you have all these labor shortages, which is a huge issue, and crew, pilots, ground staff. When do we get back to any sort of normal or new normal, or however you want to frame it?
Well, I would never call it the new normal. I would always call it the next normal.
Okay.
Because it's going to be definitely not the end of this development in this industry. And I think we will probably stabilize things probably after the peak summer. I think in autumn we will see some stabilization. But still, there are other topics. The aircraft don't come in time because the producers don't deliver the aircraft in time. So the whole planning process, which goes over years, of course, needs constant flexibility in terms of you need to replan things when you get new decisions. For example, we are also, renovating the whole fleet interior successively, and then you have a bottleneck of seat providers, which you cannot necessarily control because it's small family companies that provide these seats. Just an example. So it needs flexibility going forward, I think, upward and downward, in creating this nimbleness to be flexible in both sides. That is actually the management, I would say, input that you have to deliver, not that you have a fixed plan and then you execute on the plan. That's history, and I think whatever next normals we will see, and we are entering now a down phase in the economy, this is definitely not the last one in the next couple of years. Hopefully no more pandemic, but we don't know what's coming in the winter. So expect the unexpected. I think that is something which is a good advice.
Okay, that's the mantra, expect the unexpected. Now, we'll talk about digital transformation a bit. In the same way that you're going to have staff shortages in the crew and the ground staff and pilots, it's going to be difficult to attract the right people to help you through digital transformation because you're competing with Amazon, Apple, the big brands. How are you going to attract people?
Yeah, the war for talent is, of course, particularly in this sphere, bottleneck qualification is definitely a key topic and will become even bigger. I just learned that in Germany alone, you will probably need about 400,000 people, and not only in the service jobs, also a lot of qualified people in the next 30 years every year.
Yeah.
So that shows you the dimension of the issue. So it's one side, it's a very industry-specific one with certain bottleneck qualification. On the other hand, is the question of the aging societies in Western world, or Western part of the hemisphere. So this altogether is a huge challenge, I would say. And so you have to be attractive enough for your talent to come. And even the big digital giants are now suffering getting the right people, particularly when you look at the new work-life balance questions, how much home office, how much third-party office you will have, and certain concepts of that worked before don't work anymore.
Sure.
So you need to be attractive. And how are you attractive? Of course, there's the packages, but it's very much also, I think, a vision, a cause you can rally around. And then it's also, as I said, does it fit the lifestyle of the people as well? And you cannot just order them to be certain days in the office. Yeah? So it has to be a balance that has to come naturally. And I call that the 4 C's. How do you get people, for example, into the office? It's the 4 C's. It's like communicate, it's collaborate, it's celebrate, and maybe the ominous coffee. So the
I was going to add cake.
Standing for formal exchanges. Yeah? And it's just a synonym for how do you actually interact in social spheres that go beyond the traditional, let's say, functional relationships. So that will be very important, how you're attractive for that. And that's not to be underestimated as a topic why somebody might choose an employer.
It would be great if you could, obviously automation is a greater need for automation than ever before, and it would be great if you could flick a switch and everything would be fixed, but you can't. So is there sort of low-hanging fruit, things that you can do that sort of automatically will make a difference to the airline, to passengers, to staff?
Absolutely, lots of stuff that's also undergoing. I mean, we saw our weaknesses in the crisis even more so, and compared to other industries, we are lagging behind in automation and digitalization and all those topics. We're in front of some others, there's still ones behind us even, but we don't look at those, and we might not even look at other airlines when we compare. We look at other industries that are doing better, and of course retailing is one industry that has really advanced in the digital front ahead of us. So what we can learn from those guys, but applying it to the aviation industry, and that is something which a lot of people underestimate how complex that system is, because we talk about digital, but the backbone of all our systems are basically analog.
Yep.
So even the electronic ticket is just the move from a physical to an electronic ticket is not really, on the surface it looks like an electronic ticket, but the backbone are still analog processes, paper processes. So that's something we need to tackle, and this is the big elephant in the room for the whole industry. It's not about shiny front ends, it's about how you tackle, and there's a surgery at the open heart basically, because the system will never stop. How do you actually tackle the backbone? How do you tackle the big elephant of the backbone processes to get that right? Otherwise, we will not make this big leap which is necessary for this industry.
So talking a bit about the elephant in the room, I think NDC's been a bit of an elephant in the room for some time, and it's, we're a decade into this now. How do we learn from the implementation, the development of NDC to prevent that from happening with other large-scale projects going forward?
Yeah, I mean, if you look back when NEC started, and I think we were one of the front runners there, the trailblazers there, when it really became into effect was 2015. That's now already 7 years behind us. And have we arrived where we want to be with NEC in these 7 years? Definitely not. Although I can say for the Lufthansa Group, I think we're probably one of the front runners there. Currently, we produce 3 out of 4 coupons, 3 or 4 coupons in the modern digital format, at least in the production of it, not in the servicing of it. That's what I meant with the backbone still needs to be reformed. But that has progressed. There's still an open element which is particularly visible on the corporate side. So NEC at corporates, that's for us the big frontier still, because it's more complex, you have more stakeholders, and you need to act more in sync. So one of the learnings, when you look at these last 7 years, is I think that you cannot just go alone. You need to act together, and this is the analog that I made in the beginning, that the stakeholders have to find more of a common cause to actually tackle NEC maturation, to tackle payment topics, to tackle offers and orders. And that's something where, for example, in IATA, we also have started a new program to do this differently from NEC. And I think that gives me some hope that this time we can learn also from that experience.
So how will this new program be different?
Well, first of all, you need to identify, which are the value blocks in the air retailing that are really important to you. And I think the 3 we have identified is for sure continue on the track for NDC maturation. I particularly with Lufthansa Group, it's on the corporate side, but for others it's still getting there because a lot of airlines have a very low penetration still with NDC.
Right.
So that is also, what I would say, the camel or the caravan is only as fast as the last camel, So, and you need to get also those airlines on board that and offer them ways to do that are not so quick in application. And this is mainly the ones who are now also having financial issues during the crisis that they cannot easily invest. Those who have invested actually can double down and go in speedier, but you have to find also here common speed for the whole industry. Second value block, I think that is really something where we now work closer together is payment. It's just starting. And for example, Lufthansa Group is payment costs are this year for the first time higher than a distribution cost. And because we have actually broken the monopolies on distribution side, but in payment there is still a lot of monopolies. So that's the second block we want to work together. And the third one is the roadmap to offers and orders. That's the backbone reform that we need to do. And the difference is that we do this now from a more collaborative approach, that you don't just set a standard like you have done with NEC, but you also think of how you would like to execute it, that you find methodologies how to execute it, maybe first solution spaces how to do it, and maybe you find also first use cases where you act together. Acting together means under the umbrella of the industry federation, but also in terms of a coalition of the willing, that those airlines that are willing to move faster together, they actually form a consortium and work together on those topics, and not that everybody does the go-it-alone strategy.
So, you mentioned payments there. Are you seeing this as a sort of greater revenue stream for you, or are there other parts of fintech that you see the airlines getting into?
In fintech, you specifically, of course, this is one of the fields, and there's some cross-industry fields I think that are very promising. I would say fintech is the one that everybody speaks about now, and there are a couple of examples of what you can do there. Others more further out there is probably health industry, connection with travel and journey and all that. When you talk to fintech, there is, of course, the question of payment, how payment is done. I'm not talking about cryptocurrency here, I'm talking about using a disruptive form of payment now in general, and how you break the cycle of the monopolies. So it's not just about technology, it's also about commercial relationships. But there are a lot of things that the customer, of course, now probably is more eager to have than in the past in terms of flexibility of price freezes, of buy now, pay later concepts. even in a downward circle. Yeah, be careful here. I tell everybody, don't try to be a bank.
Yeah.
But we have to find ways to cater for those new needs of the customers, which is definitely changing. Also, new savings methods that you could be applied. You could apply the wallet in a different way and see how a wallet is not just a form of payment, but actually can be put further earlier in the funnel that you come to inspiration. Let's assume, for example, the case of you save money for your wedding trip. So you have an inspirational case that's connected to your wallet and things like that that you can then apply, hopefully, also to your retail value chain in the air travel industry.
So it's interesting that you say don't try to be a bank, because the banks seem to want to be travel companies now. What's that all about?
Well, not sure about that. They want to do that. But I mean, this is what I called before this the Pac-Man effect of the industry, where basically you see now that various players looking at this whole value chain from inspiration to post-flight engagement, with, of course, also the payment part being an important one, and how you stretch out when, depending on what your strength is, how you stretch out to the other value blocks, and you're trying to capture more of the value chain. And this is an interesting one because you have new talks with new players that you have never talked to before. And I think that makes this industry very exciting these days. It's on the one hand forming new alliances along the value blocks, but also possibly the topic of consolidation happening. And we see it, of course, in the TMC world happening very strongly. So whatever we do, I think we have to make sure that there's enough competition in each of these value block fields. That's an important one. But there's a lot of excitement, I think, out there that things are happening, and that's very encouraging.
Do you think there's a danger that if you make your search and booking process and your online retailing environment really slick, but then the passengers get to the airport and it's chaos, the brand damage is still there? How are you going to balance that?
Yeah, I wouldn't say brand damage. I would say we have definitely a very critical situation, and let's not forget some of those people who are traveling for the first time in 2 years or so. They have high expectations. They pay a lot of money around now for the tickets. So I think it's something we'll overcome. I think that is something which is the bread and butter, and you have to get it right. So if you don't get the basics right, forget about all that inspirational nice things that you're promising in front of the value chain. So there's a lot of homework to be done there, but I don't think it will be unsurmountable. I think it will be overcome, but it's not something that is fixed in a day. So this will take longer, as I mentioned, but that's the basics. Without that, everything else is nothing.
And just very briefly, airlines are being accused every day of greenwashing. Can an airline ever do enough so as not to be accused of greenwashing?
Well, first of all, funny enough, not funny, but it's a bit cynical actually, is that these days I think the whole topic of CO2 and the whole of the question of environmental and sustainability topics have, in the crisis in Europe, taken second seat. If you look out now what's happening with coal energy extension, what's happening with gas and oil shares of companies. So there's a new angle to it, but not for our industry. For our industry, it remains a question of to live or die in the long term. So it's a generational topic, but it's something we have to look at probably from a perspective of not just 1 to 5 years, but rather 20, 25 years. That's why we also have a target for net zero in 2050. And I think that's realistic. Nothing earlier, I think, is realistic than that. And there are lots of efforts done on this in a structural way. There is not the one thing that solves it all soon. If you ask me for one topic that is definitely the absolute most critical topic in this respect, apart from new aircraft and so on, which will be traditional aircraft doing a better job rather than electric or hydrogen for the time being, at least in the range of aircraft we're talking about. But then it is the one topic of alternative fuels, sustainable alternative fuels.
Yeah.
And I think that is the absolutely most important topic, and we need to invest much more into that collectively, because this topic is the only solution.
Yeah.
Until the first hydrogen aircraft in that range will fly, we will have produced worldwide 40,000 more traditional aircraft from now until then. So we need to find different forms of fuel, and sustainable alternative fuels is actually the one that we need to invest much more into.
Tamur, our time is up. Thank you very much.